get through it. At least that's my goal. But I received so much mail about the Jordan Maxwell episode and his personal legal situation. So many people have linked me to the other guy's side of the story. And I really wish people would utilize the subreddit instead of just emailing me, because then we can get a thread going where we really look at both sides and discuss some of the controversy as a group. And then it's not so dead end as an email. But consider that. If you have something to say about an episode, try starting a thread on the subreddit or the Higherside Chat's Facebook page if you're not quite as familiar with Reddit and the way it works. And then we can all get involved in talking about some of these shows. There's a lot of content in them. And I feel like that aspect of the show is kind of missing. So that's my suggestions for that. But all I really wanted to say about the Jordan Maxwell thing is, yes, maybe Jordan Maxwell isn't his given name. Maybe he signed a business deal that didn't go well, but everyone knows who he is. And even if it's a stage name, we have a situation where there is someone else selling his books at jordanmaxwell.com, soliciting donations at jordanmaxwell.com, and the man we all know as Jordan Maxwell sees none of it. That's wrong. That's fucked up. I don't know if he got tricked into signing it away or what happened, but just those simple facts aren't right. It's dishonest to represent yourself as someone else, and regardless of anything else, no one should be doing that. Go write 10 conspiracy books of your own and do 1,000 of your own lectures instead of swindling away from someone who did. Regardless of what's on paper, just doesn't seem right. But I love the way Jordan breaks down language, and either way, that's why I had him on the show. I wish the man the best. That said, most people who've been riding the THC train for a while know that I try to avoid or correct a lot of the issues found in podcasting. Poor quality, poor preparation, lack of editing, drawn out repetitive ads, meandering intros like this one, and I think I do okay. I mean, we have a few ads here and there, but they're all show related, and I try to jazz them up a bit. I move them around. I try not to use them for every episode. But another issue I find with shows I like is a release schedule. Shows just sort of come out randomly, and I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try to commit to a new THC on the 1st, 5th, 10th, 15th, 20th, and 25th of each month. So a new show every 5 days, and you should know when they're coming out. But I still like to keep the guests a surprise for the most part because I just think it's more fun that way. So let's just get to it. No need for the ads today. There is a new option for the Money Bomb, though, that I will mention, where you can make a $5, $10, or $20 automatic monthly donation, which is great for me because I like to know how much money I have coming in a little more of a consistent fashion than it has been. And you get put into every Money Bomb automatically, which usually happens every 20 days or so. So you're really getting into a few without putting in money. So think of it as a good compromise if you want to support the show regularly and might want to win some money back, and you don't want to have to continually redonate every round, which is something people have complained about. So tough. It's tough out there. Who's got the time? But that's about all that's new from me. So let's dive into the wild world of wolfmen, canine cryptids, and other paranormal creatures right now with Linda Godfrey. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, what are we doing today?
Yeah, I say, give me some that says I get up every morning at 5:30 and commute for an hour and a half to some bullshit job. And my jag-off boss expects me to kiss his balls all day just so I can afford to keep my ungrateful screaming kids decked out and Dora the Explorer shit and my wife up to her fat ass in self-help videos until the day I get up the courage to put a shotgun in my mouth.
Right here.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one.
All right, people, we know the world is much weirder than it appears on the surface, and today we're taking a microscope to one slice of the paranormal pie, and that's these legends, sightings, and encounters with strange unknown canines, dogmen, werewolves, or whatever other name you want to give to these elusive entities. And we have a guest today who is undoubtedly the leading author and investigator into these creatures, as well as several other paranormal and strange topics, which I'm sure we'll touch on as well. Her name is Linda Godfrey, and out of her many books, several focus on these wolfmen beings, including Hunting the American Werewolf, Real Wolfmen, True Encounters in Modern America, The Michigan Dogman, and the one that got the ball rolling, The Beast of Bray Road. It's going to be a wild ride, and I'm psyched to be on it. Linda, welcome to THC.
Thanks so much for having me, Greg.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
I'm always looking for fringe topics to cover on this show, and I like each episode to be kind of wildly different from the next. And I had a listener suggest that I have you on, and I honestly thought the topic of werewolves and the like was a little too goofy to be taken seriously, although I'm definitely a fan of cryptids in general. But as I dug into the reports of upright walking canine encounters, I found that there's a lot more meat on these bones than I would have thought. And I'm sure you had similar feelings when you started out, but now it seems like you're the go-to researcher for these types of sightings. So was this something you always took seriously, or was it more of a process?
Oh no, it was. I've always had some interest in things like UFOs, and when I was a kid, I was always glued to my fairy tale books. I've had an interest in otherworldly things all my life, but I had never honestly given a thought to werewolves until it just so happened that I was working as a newspaper reporter in Walworth County, Wisconsin, for a county-wide weekly, and heard these rumors that people in my own hometown of Elkhorn were reporting seeing something that they described, for lack of a better word, as a werewolf out along this 2-mile stretch of country road. And, I thought it was funny, but I just for fun kind of checked into it a little bit and discovered that indeed people were talking about it. And not only that, that our county animal control officer actually had a file folder marked werewolf, which is news. Which is news in itself. I went in to see him, and he showed it to me, and it was full of the names and addresses and reports from people who had been calling him and basically saying, "I saw this thing. I don't know what it is, but if there was such a thing as a werewolf, this would be it." And he was, of course, skeptical himself too, but he couldn't come up with any explanation. And that made me really start thinking, well, if this was just a joke or some hoaxer, I even knew one or two of the people in there. I knew they were just regular people around the town. I thought people who are perpetrating a hoax don't really call the authorities and give them all their contact information.
Right.
So that was one little red flag at the beginning. And then I thought, well, even if it's just some sort of dangerous, unidentifiable predator that's around, people certainly have a right to know that if it's true. And if it's just some weird folklore, well, I'll write it up and it will be some sort of maybe local legend, but we'll never probably go any farther. I remember the editor and I saying that, and nothing was ever farther from the truth, because once it came out, it went national, much to our shock and surprise, in about 2 weeks. And I started hearing from people all over the country telling me that they had the same thing in their area, even if it was sometimes known by a different name. But I soon recognized that everyone was talking basically about the same creature, the same mode of operating, the same behavior, and they just didn't know that other people had it or that anyone else had seen it in many cases. And I realized it was quite a bigger thing, and felt sort of obligated to keep track of it, because it didn't seem that anyone else was paying attention to this phenomena. And, it was openly scoffed at, by many people right from the beginning, because it just sounds outrageous. Werewolves, it doesn't sound like a real thing. Well, I say in all my books, and I still say, I don't believe in actual traditional werewolves,
right,
where there's like Lon Chaney sprouting whiskers, turning all of his bones and muscles from a human into a canine. I just don't believe that. And honestly, in most cases, somewhere in the high 90s, and mind you, it's over 20 years later, and I'm still getting an average of 1 to 3 a week.
Wow.
from all over the place. Most cases report nothing that couldn't be a natural animal behaving weirdly. There's nothing supernatural about any canine walking on its hind legs. They just don't normally do it because their skeletal and muscular structures aren't really designed well for it. But they can. You can go on YouTube and search for dancing dog or running dog, and find all kinds of great examples where they do it. But normally they don't, unless people have either trained and motivated them, or in the wild perhaps they're missing a forelimb or something, and nobody's ever reported one missing a forelimb that was walking. So the great question that still drives me is, why do people keep seeing this? And the secondary one, probably just as equally important, is, why do there seem to be large canine type creatures walking around on their hind legs when there's no real scientific record or fossil record for anything like this?
Wow. I mean, that's pretty interesting. So you've been looking at this for over 20 years. I mean, with so many cases that people come to you with, what is consistent about the appearance and the behavior? More so the behavior is kind of what I'm interested in. But what do you see happening time and time again? Is it people being attacked, or are they running away from humans?
In over 20 years, I've never had anyone, other than one man who was scratched and he feels it was accidentally up in Canada. Nobody, even when they feel that they were in imminent danger of being eaten, was ever actually even harmed in the slightest way. The creature intimidates, almost acts like territorial aggression. Sometimes people feel they're getting strange messages from it, like stay away or I'm superior to you, that kind of thing. It intimidates people, but it doesn't hurt them as far as of any examples that I know of. And that's kind of unusual in itself, but it's also explainable by, a predator defending its territory and wanting its privacy for some reason. It's just that there's, again, with the behavior, people will say things to me like, I felt like it was angry that I saw it. I felt that it was telling me it could jump on my car if it wanted to. Now, how often do you ever hear somebody who's reporting seeing a bear in the wild? I've seen bears in the ditches, in northern Wisconsin, that kind of thing. I can't imagine saying to somebody, I felt the bear was angry that I saw it, or
Right.
I felt the bear was sending me this message that it wanted to jump on my car. And yet I hear that time and time, or people will say, I felt its eyes were boring right through me, that kind of thing. There seems to be this kind of secondary psychoactive element to many of the sightings. That's weird. And the other thing is the behavior of it it'll run right at someone or chase someone or look fierce, and then at the last second it runs into whatever cover there is. It's almost always seen near some type of either a cornfield or a woods or something that it can jump into and hide. So that's what's really consistent. And in appearance, that also is strangely consistent. The appearance will vary about the same that you'd expect to see within a natural wolf pack or between certain large dog breeds.
Mm-hmm.
The fur is usually described as dark brown. Shaggy is the most common, but sometimes it's gray and a little, closer cut. People will normally describe the head as very like a German Shepherd or a wolf, with upright triangular ears, a long muzzle, fangs. If they can see the mouth at all, they usually describe fangs. They describe claws and paws, not hands. Very different from Bigfoot, especially in that way. Often there's sort of a ruff on the back of the neck, a tail. They'll say things like its legs, it was running really well on its hind legs, but the legs were bent backwards. And by that, I know what they mean. The dog, they call it, the dog specialists would call it a hock, but we would call it the ankle and heel bone joint area. We expect that to be on the ground, but in a canine, they run on their toe pads, so it's actually up in the air where we're expecting to see a knee bending forward.
Right.
It's a different part of their anatomy there. So that's why it always looks like they're running with legs bent backwards, and that's what I hear over and over. And the other thing is, unless it's one of the very small percentage that fall into what I call the supernatural range, and it's not a large number at all, they exhibit the normal eye shine for a canine, which is yellow, green, gold. So in every way, it's not like they have human faces, or if you killed one, it would look part human or anything like that. If you did kill one, I think it would just look like a big strange wolf or wolf dog hybrid, and they may well be wolf dog hybrids. There's a lot of evidence in the reports, to my mind, for that possibility. But it's just so odd that, I've talked to wolf experts and scientists, and no one's ever been able to give me an answer as to why a natural wolf would, or wolf dog would adapt itself to run upright. Why there are no proven examples of this, in scientific lore.
Right.
So that's the big question, And then there's another paradigm completely. When I interview Native Americans about it, they say, oh yes, this animal is known to our ancestors, the walking upright wolf-like creature, and it's actually partly physical and partly in the spirit world, and it can go back and forth between them. And they believe the same thing about Bigfoot, and actually it would explain a lot of things about both creatures.
Right.
So I just try to report everything and keep an open mind personally. Just when I think the evidence has gone over to one side or the other, I'll learn something different that'll make me go, well, maybe not, And the other thing is, I like to keep an open mind because I think that as soon as you declare, unless you've got really good evidence for it, and I still never had one in front of me to say this with any certainty, but as soon as you declare that it's for sure natural or for sure a spirit animal, you're not investigating anymore.
Right.
Then you're just working to confirm your own biases. And I try to keep my reporter hat on as best I can, and kind of not succumb to that line of thinking.
Right, and that's why I like your approach to it, because I've heard you talk about the Native American side of it a couple of times before, and that is really interesting to me. I've always enjoyed looking into any kind of folklore that's been around for a long time. We have Europeans have a history of wiping that stuff away as soon as they take over an area, but it seems like all the other cultures of the world have those long standing stories of kind of paranormal stuff. So I thought that was a pretty interesting element, and it also kind of is in line with what you got from a government trained remote viewer one time, isn't it?
Well, sort of. He's got a different tack. Yeah, and this was a man who was, employed at one time by the government as a remote viewer, and still works in some freelance capacities for them. And he went in and did remote viewing based on a sketch that I made that is kind of a composite witness sketch that appears in several of my books. And what he came up with was that they were actually extraterrestrial in origin, and that the ones scattered over the planet Earth that are here now were left millennia ago as sort of ranging scouts for whatever civilization this is, and that that's why they're not really supposed to be seen, and why they don't want to be seen, and why they're held back from hurting people, but that they're just kind of waiting for their civilization to come back one of these days. So I don't know what to think of that.
Right.
He did stop viewing because he kind of felt they were sort of reverse viewing him after a while, and that he was discovered and got very nervous and won't view them anymore.
That's weird, but I mean, to me, ETs and spiritual beings and these guardians, they're all kind of the same. At least I kind of categorize them as similar.
Many similarities, right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, when people take ayahuasca or certain psychedelics, they see human-animal hybrids as well. So I wonder if that doesn't open up a doorway to make you more able to see these kind of things, but maybe they show up in our waking life once in a while, or maybe people's brains release the right chemicals naturally, and the stars align and they can see through to some other dimension. They see a wolf man.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I do ask most witnesses, or many of them volunteer, as to their sobriety level, and almost to a person, with very few exceptions, they will say they were driving, they were or whatever, they were perfectly sober, they don't drink, they don't take drugs. So that's really the predominant. The one guy who said, yes, I'd been drinking when I was on my way home, but when I saw that, I sobered up really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And why, if you think about it, there are many people who have had the experience of having had too much to drink. Did you see walking wolves? It's not,
right.
It's not what happens normally when you get drunk. and there aren't too many people walking around America on ayahuasca. That's kind of a,
Not yet.
I know some people who have traveled, to Central and South America and gone through the procedure, and it's really kind of a long, drawn out, unpleasant thing. It's not something you do for social recreation,
Right. Not a party
especially
drug.
not in the U.S. So, so I can't blame it on anything like that. Many times there's more than one witness. It'll be a car driving past with several people in it, or a couple of people out hiking or hunting or whatever, and they see the same thing. So it's not like a singular hallucination. I don't believe that in most cases a mass hallucination would be applicable. It's not the same thing as where you have a mass crowd that's somewhere for a worshipful purpose and they all are staring into the sun and all see something. Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very, in most cases, these are just normal, great people going about their lives, and they see this thing and it kind of changes their worldview forever.
Yeah, it makes it even more interesting that they're not expecting to look for anything. They're not hunting anything. It just kind of shows up. But can you recount some of the details of maybe an encounter or two that you found to be really intriguing?
Well, they're almost all intriguing to me. I mean, each one's a little bit different. A lot of them do happen when people are driving at night and they see it by the roadside, and it either stands up it's either crouching and then stands up and sometimes runs after them, or the opposite. It'll be running along on its hind legs and then drop down to all fours when it knows it's being observed. But one of the most spectacular is recounted in my book, Real Wolfmen, True Encounters in Modern America. And although they don't give credit, the sci-fi show Paranormal Witness actually did an episode on that called The Maine Wolf Pack, which was
cool.
my title. Yeah, you won't know from watching the TV show, and the TV show was sensationalized.
Yeah, they all are. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I've gotten very jaded about the TV shows about this subject, but in this occurrence, there was a very nice middle-aged professional couple sitting on the front porch of this farmhouse that they rented. Very just nice, salt of the earth people. I've talked many, many times with these witnesses, and they're just great people. They're sitting on the front porch. It was their habit to sit out and have a late night cup of coffee, and they would keep a kind of a floodlight / flashlight on the porch next to them because there was a pond, and they like to shine it down there once in a while and see the deer that would come drinking at the pond. Well, they're sitting there, and they both just got this ominous dread feeling, and they shone the flashlight out in the yard and saw 3 upright dog or wolf-like creatures that they could tell were at least 7 feet tall, creeping toward them on their hind legs. And they shone it in a different direction, and there were 2 more. So there were a total of 5 of these things silently sneaking up on them on their front porch. And when they shined the light, the creatures stopped and kind of backed up, and they were able to get into the house. The man's guns were locked up in an outdoor utility building, and so he didn't really have any weapons. They called 911. Although we've never been able to get the 911 call released. The TV show tried, we tried, they tried. But they did call 911. 911 told them to call the local game warden, and the game warden told them just stay in the house and shut the doors. And neither one ever came out to investigate. And they did they were up all night. Their daughter was asleep upstairs. In the TV show, it shows them sleeping with axes and knives. They didn't do that.
Right.
But they were pretty terrified. And then they found the next morning they found these large impressions in the grass where the creatures had walked. On the TV show, it shows perfect footprints in mud, but it wasn't like that. That was, a lot more than they had. But that was a pretty amazing thing. The creatures stayed there all night too, because every once in a while, Shelley and Eric would look out and see that they were still there. They'd shine the light out and they'd get all these pairs of eyes looking back at them.
Wow.
And they slunk away sometime, when it started getting light out.
Yeah, that's a really good one because
Yeah.
usually with cryptids you only see one, and that's kind of been
Right.
one of my beefs with the whole field is, if they're animals, you'd think you'd see families or young ones here and there, but it really always just seems to be one that shows up in a town for a couple of years maybe or a couple of months, and then it just disappears. But to see three at once, that is pretty interesting.
Actually, that was 5, and there was
Oh,
another.
5.
Yeah, there was. I've had as many as 4 before. That's the record. There was another woman who passed a lie detector test. A very stringently applied polygraph expert gave the test. It was on the first Monster Quest episode on this. And she saw one by itself, and then she and her friends, she was with 3 other friends, they all saw it, drove away from there and then encountered 3 more that were drinking at a stream. And I've had people in upstate New York see 2 of them jogging along a highway. There was an incident down in a southern part of the country where somebody observed a female and 3 little ones crossing a road, all upright, even the little ones. I've had other small ones observed by themselves. So it does sort of indicate that there's a breeding population.
Right. So there you go. I don't hear about that as much, especially with other cryptids, but that's pretty compelling that you found that. And another thing I noticed while looking into this, preparing for the show, is there seems to be some cases of people who have like lifelong continued sightings, the way that UFO abductees claim that it happens over and over again. And there are some people that have these reoccurring sightings of wolf men. Have you found that at all?
Yeah, there are some, and it's odd because people who go out looking and hunting for it almost never see it.
Right.
But the ones who do see it seem to be the few that will run into it, again and again, or it may habituate if they have a farm or rural area. Especially, I've had several situations like this. One in Ohio, one in northern Wisconsin, where it seems to hang around for years and kind of, just worries at the chickens and the livestock, and they can hear it walking around at night, might be scratching the siding, that kind of thing. But it never leaves anything really concrete enough for proof. They do seem to react to floodlights particularly, and a lot of people have tried things like religious blessings, either Christians leaving holy oil or water crosses marking all their doorways, or the Native American sage ceremonies. They do seem to get some relief from these too, which makes you wonder if they're natural animals. Why would that help?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's coincidental. Maybe the things are just ready to go anyway. But having floodlights or something like that does definitely seem to help.
Yeah, I guess there's a wide range of opinions on if these are more intelligent beings or alien guardians or animals. But the thing you said about people having a feeling that it was upset that it was seen, that's super interesting to me. It's almost in line with some type of telepathic communication. But has anyone described it to you that way, or is it more or less just a fleeting feeling?
No, they will say, they won't really say, they'll say that I felt this was what it was telling me, not in words, but, just in a specific message that I certainly understood, and they'll say, I thought I was crazy, telling myself to get a grip on it. One recent woman that wrote was telling me that. She was saying to herself, get a grip, don't talk about it, don't tell anybody, that kind of thing. But they don't say it was a message in the King's English. It was a specific impression that was imparted to them, and usually very threatening. And I've heard that Bigfoot witnesses will sometimes say the same things, but they're usually not so aggressively threatening as the ones from the Dogman. So I don't. And I've speculated that perhaps if you're in a moment of fear and panic, that I guess it's possible that people could be, reading the body language, and sort of getting an impression that way. But those that I've spoken to, when I've said to the witnesses, well, how about this? They'll say, no, it wasn't like that at all. I really felt I was getting this direct mental message of some kind, and even though it felt crazy, that's what I thought it was.
Right. It is possible that people are projecting that, but it does seem consistent with reports of other types of beings in this realm of cryptozoology and paranormal, that it's a consistent type of communication, the way they describe it. Yeah, of course,
Right.
It's not in English, but it's more of just overarching feelings or emotions that are kind of transferred. It's interesting. It's a weird dynamic to it. It makes me think that there might be something more to them than just animals, because animals, animals are not quite as elusive as some of these cryptids seem to be.
No, and the longer that I study them, the more I kind of lean that way. I mean, they don't do anything overtly that a natural animal couldn't do, but it's these impressions of the witnesses and the oddity of them and this and their behavior that is just really out of the box, that makes me just wonder if they have some other element to them that we perhaps haven't even guessed at yet. It's hard to say, because some of the messages are quite specific. There was one woman who felt it was saying to her, I know where you live, and if you tell anyone about me, I will come and get you. And she was so terrified that she didn't tell her husband for like 3 days. And when I came to interview her a week later, she was still shaking and started crying when she told about it. The effect was that strong upon her. Or, another woman said, I was driving by and I saw it and it looked in my eyes and I felt it was saying, I could jump on your car right now if I wanted to.
Huh. Man, yeah, that's freaky stuff.
When's the last time you heard somebody say, well, I saw a coyote and I thought it was saying to me, I could, dance on your head or whatever if I liked. It's just, I see a lot of animals in the wild and I've just never even thought of something like that. Even when people have been scared, my husband's a hunter. He's had a bear come up to his tree blind and that kind of thing. He just thought, oh, there's a bear, and
right.
It's not the sort of thing. You don't feel like you're getting impressed messages from them.
It seems pretty clear that the people who see these things, it isn't like seeing an animal. They're hit with a wave of emotion, a wave of feelings, and it seems
Right.
clear on the onset that they're seeing something special, something that's weird.
They recognize it. Yeah, they recognize it as something special.
Which is, something to definitely make note of. But to take this into a weirder direction, I mean, lately I've had a few guests on and done a few shows about occult magic and Aleister Crowley, and you hear about these guys summoning demons and conjuring up entities of one type or another, and I get a little skeptical of that stuff because we don't have monsters running in the streets or stage shows where demons are summoned up. But have you ever given any thought to some of these Wolfmen sightings being related to conjuring at all?
Well, there are several different supernatural possibilities. A conjuring type of thing is one of them. An offshoot of that would be like the Native American skinwalker, where medicine men can project an astral or spirit double body that either goes out from them and mimics a creature like that, or sort of covers them like a spirit suit. But I don't think there is enough of that activity going on to account for all of the sightings that I see. And normally, if people report a creature that has hands instead of paws or red eyes, or there are several other markers that it may not have a tail, or it might have a more of a man-like body with actual shoulders rather than just well-developed upper forelimbs. Those are the kind of markers, and they're, again, it's probably less than 5% of the ones that I get, but taken together, I think they're sort of a second subset of sightings.
That makes sense.
But they can't explain all of them.
Yeah.
By any means,
Now, are there any interesting commonalities between the hot spots that these things are sighted at, or does it seem just to be kind of random wooded areas?
Well, they can appear in, they're not always wooded areas. Sometimes they are seen in fairly urban places. It's, it's surprising, but there are some commonalities. And the interesting thing is that a lot of them are the same sorts of places that in Europe are considered haunted places, or places where phantom black dogs or other creatures are seen. And these include crossroads, cemeteries. In lieu of crossroads, sometimes these days I'm getting more and more reports of them being seen on freeway overpasses or cloverleafs. Wow. Churchyards, military areas, especially any old sacred places. But beyond that, also there's almost always water, a lot of water source, some kind of cover for the dogmen. And usually there's some sort of prey that they're after, either farm animals or deer. A lot of times they've been seen and reported running away carrying a haunch of a deer or a small animal or something like that. I had some ladies in northern Illinois hear their cat screaming one night, and it had been outside, and they went to their patio door and saw this 6-foot-tall dog or wolf-like creature standing there on its hind legs with their cat in its mouth.
Oh, no. I love cats.
This has a happy ending. They startled it so much by screaming and pounding on the glass that it dropped the cat and ran off.
Oh, man. Well, that's good at least.
Yeah.
So I guess one of my big issues with cryptids in general is that all the stories I hear are generally from the past. And I was wondering, is there anything that people are reporting to you now, that like pockets of weird sightings that maybe you've heard about in the past year or two? It doesn't even have to be in the canine family, but just any kind of weird entity that people are reporting to you recently?
Oh, sure. These things go on all the time, and they go up to present. I had my last sighting of something not on Bray Road, but in that vicinity was February 20th from a really reliable area resident. Oh, nice. And kind of an amazing sighting. Yeah, he saw it at 3 a.m. chasing a coyote through a field. So,
wow. Well, there's your contrast. There's clearly what a coyote looks like, and then here's this thing.
Exactly. There was no comparison. And he was a non-believer, total skeptic, until that happened. I've got a new book coming out in August called American Monsters, History of the Sightings, Lore, and Legends of Monsters in America. And I've got a really amazing, huge bird sighting that happened, within a few years ago in northern Wisconsin that, hasn't been published anywhere else, that I think will surprise people a lot. One thing I discovered when I was researching that book is that there are a lot more sightings of weird, huge, flying things than you'd imagine. Whether they look like the ancient pterosaurs, or they look like some kind of furry thing with bat wings that's usually called bat squatch, or I've had one called man bat that I call man bat, or whether they're just like the impossibly huge stork or condor, like feathered birds. Mm-hmm. There's more than you would think. I was absolutely stunned at how many I came up with.
Yeah, that's definitely my favorite area of cryptids, the flying ones and the ones that are in the water, because both those areas, like, we don't know as much about the creatures that live in them. It seems kind of weird,
especially the water creatures. I've written a whole book I've got a book called Lake and Sea Monsters with a different Chelsea House Press, but I had to look up a lot of those too. And the thing is, you start realizing that there are these really deep areas of the ocean that we just haven't been able to penetrate, and we really don't know what's down there. Mm-hmm. It turns out there are squid, huge squid, so much bigger than any scientist ever predicted, and that were scoffed at and not believed until we were able to start recognizing and retrieving their carcasses when they washed up.
Yeah, giant squids are super interesting. Also, of course, Loch Ness Monster type beings is not just in Loch Ness, but apparently these things are sighted in areas all over the place, even in Lake Tahoe, supposedly.
Right, yeah. I mean, they're just so common. Lake monsters are everywhere. It makes me sometimes wonder if either these are also, the spirit animals coming back and forth. Native Americans believed that any body of water, a river or a lake with freshwater springs, those springs were the doors back and forth to the spirit world. Or is it that there are well-hidden subterranean underwater passages, between them, connecting them to larger bodies of water or out to the ocean or whatever.
Right. Yeah, that's also a possibility. They're crazy. But I wanted to ask you about a little bit more of your other work because it sounds right up my alley. I live in San Diego now, but I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and I've taken trips all over the Midwest. And I saw a few years ago that you wrote Weird Michigan and Weird Wisconsin. They're travel guides to the area's local legends and best kept secrets, and a couple of other books on various strange stuff in those two states. And I hoped you could give us an interesting anecdote or two about some of the other stuff you've looked into. What other kinds of weirdness have you found interesting in those Midwest states?
Oh, those books were just so much fun. They got me into so many different areas. For one thing, they have a lot on outsider artists, which visionary artists, which is really one of my top favorite subjects. And so you get to go interview these really interesting people who have just turned their entire lawns and acreages into outdoor museums full of these crazy sculptures and things that they put together. But I also, because the topics were sort of preordained with those books, I had to do a lot of ghost investigations, which wasn't something, it's not really my big thing. I'm not super into the ghost huntings, and I didn't really expect to see anything. Frankly, I've had some experiences as a child that left me a little bit scared of these things. And once in Michigan and once in Wisconsin, I actually saw a ghostly figure. And I don't know, I'm hesitant to call them ghosts in the traditional sense of, are these roaming dead people's spirits, because I don't know what they are. They could be strange manifestations of electromagnetic energy interacting with the person's consciousness. They could be who knows what, strange other forms of life. I don't know what they are. But in one case, I was probably the weirder of the two tales. I was in Manistee, Michigan, and investigating a place I had just learned about that day. I had gone to visit the town's historian. He said, "Oh, yeah, go down the block, and there's this brick building that used to be this German tavern, and they've got this ghost named Basement Billy." And so I went down there, and it turned out it was now offices, but at one time this big German family had built it. They had a tavern on the main floor. They had an apartment upstairs where two of the daughters lived, and the whole place was supposed to be incredibly haunted. And the owner, who had no idea I was coming, or that anybody even ever knew about it, was there, was very gracious about it, and she took me into the basement to meet Basement Billy, who supposedly was a young son of that family who had died of typhoid when he was a young teenager, and was quite the active poltergeist, unscrewing light bulbs, and he used to would swipe all the glassware off of an antique store shelf when there was an antique store in there during the night while it was locked, that kind of thing. And people would sometimes see him, dressed as a young man in early turn of the century clothing, just outside of the building. So we're down in this big basement, and I said, well, let's just turn the lights off and see if anything shows up. I had no big hopes for anything. I just really needed some pictures, for the book. Mm-hmm. And there was almost nothing in there. It was a gigantic space. Any of the ductwork was covered by brown paper, so there was no reflective surface. There was one little bare light bulb behind us and one at the other end of this basement, and that was it. And she turned them off, and it was pitch black. Literally couldn't see anything. And we stood there a couple of minutes, and I was just about to say, we'll turn the lights back on, when all of a sudden, this round light-like orb, and I say light-like because it wasn't emitting light, it was sort of like it was drawing in light, if that makes any sense. It was about the size of a basketball. It was just below the 7-foot ceiling, maybe about 8 feet away from me, and it had some little projections on the sides of it. And I had this feeling that it was curious or sentient, or that it had some sort of intelligence to it. And I was so shocked. I thought, my eyes are playing tricks. This is crazy. I looked away, shut my eyes, looked back, and it was still there, kind of hanging there like, no, I'm here, I'm here. And I was so shocked by the time I thought of pulling my camera was hanging around my neck. By the time I pulled it up into position to take the picture, then it faded away.
And I've heard that before too.
Yeah, it's a typical thing.
Man.
And the interesting thing about that is that, I heard the owner kind of gasp. She also saw it, but she saw it as the fully dressed entity that people expect to see, the young man. Now, that made me think, why would I who had no preconceptions and wasn't expecting anything, saw it as sort of a raw, pure form of energy, whereas she saw it as the fully articulated young man. So
Right.
it makes me wonder if it is some sort of energy that does interact with our consciousness, and partly fills our expectations.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's an interesting thread to these type of sightings. I would love to see something like that, but it just hasn't happened. I've actually took the show on a ghost hunt in one of the first attempts at doing a video in the field episode, and it went all night to like 4 a.m. and nothing. I saw nothing. Of course, the people I was with, they felt like they saw some things and heard some things and wondered why I didn't do the show. And I was like, well, there's nothing to do. I could either over sensationalize it like they do on television,
Right.
or I could just put out a bunch of night vision shots of nothing for an hour and see how interesting that is.
Right. And it's my friends who are ghost hunters say that's how it normally is. And their joke is, if you want to see a ghost, don't stand next to a ghost hunter, because they'll never see one. So that's why, and I went in an awful lot of other haunted places. And that, I just had the two experiences, but it is a good question of why, and it's the same thing with the creatures. People who go hunting for them don't normally run into them. It's a kind of a conundrum.
Yeah, well, we are getting pretty deep into this interview, and I was hoping you could give the people a little bit of information about your first book, The Poisoned Widow, because I actually know someone who told me about this book a couple of years ago, and the story kind of stuck with me because it's pretty creepy, but it wasn't until we had already had this interview scheduled that I found out that you wrote that book and that it was your first book, so that's kind of synchronistic. But can you tell the people a little bit about her story?
Yeah, it's called The Poisoned Widow, a true story of sin, strychnine, and murder. And it's the story of this petite, attractive little woman named Myrtle Schauda, who was married to the pillar of the local Methodist church in Whitewater, Wisconsin. He was a milkman, had a little dairy. They had 4 beautiful, wonderful children, and they started taking in boarders from the nearby they called it a normal school. Now it's UW Whitewater. And she had an affair with one of these student boarders, and between the two of them, they killed her husband with strychnine, and she would have gotten away with it, except then he wasn't so keen on having the ready-made family, and so she tried to kill her 4 children as well. And then things just went really crazily awry. And it's just this, it ends up just nutty. I did 6 years of research on it, and I discovered that she sort of wheedled her way out of prison and got out and had a whole another family who didn't have the slightest idea who she was or what she had done until I tracked them down and basically said, I know what your granny did last century.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Like, you did it yourself. Like, man, that's powerful.
Well, I really wanted to know how a woman like her, who I could find nothing in her background. She grew up in this, happy, close-knit farm family with, strong church ties, other than the fact that at age 17 she married a 34-year-old man, so there was kind of and he was sort of an authoritarian, but well-liked and well-respected man. I couldn't find any big thing in her history, to suggest why she might turn out like this. And I wanted to know what happened to her and where she went, and that nobody seemed to know. So I just took it upon myself to keep researching that. And There's still really no rhyme or reason. One of the interesting things, though, is that I discovered almost every place connected with where she lived has now some haunted aspect or some weird legend with it.
Oh, that's interesting. The part of the case that really stuck with me was hearing the way she tried to get rid of her 4 kids. I mean, didn't she?
Yeah.
She baked them some treats and just put them in a car and hoped that they would just all die on the ride.
Well, yeah, actually, she went downtown Whitewater and bought 4 beautiful big chocolate bonbons, that were with a filling, because strychnine's very bitter. You have to put it in something really sweet to disguise it. She'd given it to her husband in prune juice, but the kids weren't going to drink that. So she got these wonderful treats. And back in the 20s, it wasn't like today's kids were candies on, on hand all the time. These were really special. And the oldest boy, 16, Ralph, was going to drive, and her plan was that she told them not to eat the candy until they were out in the country. She sent them out to buy potatoes. And of course, her plan was that they would crash the car and they would all get killed by the strychnine, but people would think it was the car crash that killed them. And she didn't even use her own car. She didn't want her car to get wrecked, so she pretended hers was in the garage and asked a professor who lived next door if they could use his car. So, I mean, you can see just how calculating she was. And the only trouble was, being kids and being so excited to have this wonderful candy, they all immediately started eating it. And the little ones bit into it, and they all started spitting it out, except the teenager, being a teenager, gulped the whole thing down. And she still let them go, knowing, I guess she thought, well, he's driving, he'll still probably crash the car. Maybe they'll all be dead anyway, was probably what she was thinking. So she let them go, and sure enough, he started convulsing. The 13-year-old managed to commandeer the steering wheel and get them back to town to the doctors. And luckily, the children were all saved. But that brought in the district attorney, who, again, synchronistically happened to be related to my husband's family. Yeah, it was kind of a weird